So I am so curious. Obviously, you did penguins before this. And so what led you to choose to follow a polar bear on the other side of the planet?
Jeff and I are privileged to work in both poles for many years, and we've filmed polar bears a lot in the past for documentaries. We felt there was an amazing DigiNature movie to be made about them. They're just unbelievably beautiful animals, and they're so perfectly adapted to the Arctic, which is an unbelievably beautiful place. We knew there was loads of new behavior that had never been filmed before. And also we knew that it was a very contemporary story because they are at the very cutting edge of climate change, as you saw in the film. And although the movie isn't an environmental movie, we hope it's an entertaining and engaging family movie. It's impossible today, honestly, to make a movie about polar bears without telling the story of the challenges they face. And that's why we very deliberately chose to tell the story of a female bear looking back at the last 15 years, because in Svalbard, where the polar bears live that we filmed, there's been an enormous amount of change over that time period.
Yeah, that was actually one of my next questions was what led you to choose that specific bear? And you mentioned partly because it was a female bear. And so I know with penguins, there were a lot more penguins around. They were in colonies of hundreds of thousands. So I just wondered what the process was of finding that polar bear and knowing it was the right one to follow.
Because it's a movie, we write a very extensive script right from the beginning of the process, and this process started 10 years ago, and we developed it up to the point of a pitch for Disney. And I think what we both knew is the following, really, is that bear behavior is all learned from a mother bear. And so it was crucial for us to tell a story from a mother's perspective, and the story about a mother bear, because that's where all the interesting behavior happens. That's where the cubs learn from their mother. So we knew that we had to have a female bear. Second to that is that we also wanted to tell this amazingly important environmental story. And to tell that over a 3-year period would be dishonest and impossible, but to tell it over a 15-year period was absolutely the right time scale in order to kind of capture the change that would happen within a bear's life. So our script led us down that path to say we needed to make sure that we were illustrating a female bear's life over 15 years. And so crucially, when we go out in the field and populate that script, what we're looking to do is trying to find as many bears as we possibly can, but crucially they have to be female. And once we find a female bear and the female bear has cubs, then we know we have a character, and we know we have a character to follow. And then the real work starts. Then the work of our field teams and us as directors is we then have to spend as much time in that bear's presence as we can possibly stand. And bear in mind that we're working at temperatures down to minus 45 degrees. And there's only so long that you can actually, physically survive in that environment before you have to go back and get a hot meal and have some sleep. And so on any given day, you'll have to start from scratch and try and find that bear again, and go out and try and find that mother and her cubs again. So it's a very, very difficult process. But crucially, because of the way that Disney Nature's work and the stories that we wanted to tell, we were very clear about which character we would like to target right from the outset.
That's awesome. That was great. And I was wondering how, and you spoke to it a little bit, how important the message with climate change was going into it. And I was curious if it changed at all over time as you were filming it, because I know you watched a lot of it change quite dramatically. So I wondered if that became more important over time or right.
I mean, the script, as Jeff says, we write a script at the beginning. The bears don't read the script, of course, so we are constantly adapting. And a lot of the things we filmed, we hadn't expected to film. To give you an example, I think there's a very moving moment where a mother and her cub are literally going into thick melted mud, and struggling to make. Now that is reality of climate change, but we didn't expect to film it particularly, and a lot of moments like that were fresh. We knew that climate change was going to be the basis of the whole story, because polar bears are, as I said earlier, at the cutting edge. So we expected to see it, but we were surprised by some of the detail of what we filmed.
Right. And that does sort of lead me into one of my other questions, so I'm bouncing around. it does end on a very kind of surprisingly optimistic note of the mother bear talking about how her daughter's going to be a great ice bear and she's going to survive and she's going to be resilient. And so was that something you planned on going in, or is that something that came later, or why did you decide to kind of end it and frame it in that way?
I think it's important for our audiences to have a sense of empowerment and hope at the end of the film, because we believe that that's the greatest emotion that would drive people to take action, and that really helps us get our message across. I think that those extraordinary images of the mother bear climbing the iceberg, again, you would never script it because it's so impossibly beautiful that you'd never imagine that would happen. But when you film something like that and you realize at that moment in time when you're filming it, the power of those images and the power of the metaphor of what is happening there, you do suddenly the chemistry of script and narration and music and just the serendipity of capturing that unique moment gives you the power to take hope and plant it firmly in the audience's lap and say, hey, look, there is hope here, but there is also uncertainty. And I think we're both very proud about where we got to at the end of that film, because I've witnessed many people come into a room and watch the film now, and there is very rarely a dry eye in the house when we fade to black at the end of that film. So, and that makes us both very proud, because I think that's very empowering for people to use that emotion and go out there and take the actions that we can all take to influence the changing climate for the better.
Absolutely. The visuals and the cinematography were beautiful, amazing, stunning. And I wish I was more knowledgeable to ask more specific questions about it, but were there any specific shots or moments that you had that really stand out to you now and are some that you're most proud of? Things like that.
I think inevitably for us as individuals, it's the times when we were in the field with the camera operators, and Jeff and I went at different times. For me, the moment when the female was hunting the seal, they're doing what's called an aquatic stalk, which actually, interestingly, has become more and more common with climate change. But that moment when she was so carefully and quietly trying to push herself up out of the water so she could grab the hooded seal, we were there, and the cameraman and I literally were holding our breath, and we held our breath for a long time because that's a very long shot in the film. And then she goes back down so quietly and sneaks under the ice floe and tries to grab the seal but fails. That for me was an amazing moment. Never been filmed like that before.